Now, in order to output this investment data on the screen, I want to add a new component that deals with displaying this table. So we can generate a new component with the ng-gc command. And of course, the name is up to you. Here, I'll name it investment-results, and I don't need the testing related files. With this command executed, we got this component here, and I'll again start by replacing the style file with the one you found attached earlier at the beginning of this section, so that we got the proper table stylings. And as a next step, I wanna start working on that markup. And here I got actually a couple of requirements. For one, I wanna show some fallback text, like please enter some values and press calculate if the user hasn't done that yet. So we'll need to show this conditionally. Otherwise, if the user did press the calculate button, I want to output a table with that investment data. For that, I'll give that table a head with my different column headings like year, investment value, interest for the given year, total interest, and invested capital. These are the headings for my columns. And that, of course, is the data we're deriving here in that annual data. So that's all that data we already got. But then below the heading, I want to have the table body. And here I now want to dynamically output as many table rows as needed, because of course I don't know in advance for how many years the user wants to calculate that. Maybe they just want to calculate it for 1 year. Maybe for 100. I don't know it in advance, so we need some dynamic code here to output those rows. Now, before we can add that code though, we must make sure that we get those results into this component so that we have them available here. And we can achieve that by accepting an input, a bindable property that's exposed by this component to its parent component, so that the parent component can pass data into this component. And here, for accepting such input data, we again got two approaches. Both start by adding a property that should be settable from outside. And it could be named results here, though the name is up to you. Then you could turn this into an input by assigning a value where the value is the result of calling the input function with a lowercase I imported from Angular Core. This registers this as an input, to be precise, as a signal input, so using signals. Now that would be one way. The other way would be to not assign a value, but instead to add a decorator in front of it, the input decorator with an uppercase I, which is also imported from Angular Core. Now we also need to set the type of data we expect here, and I'll do that in just a second. We also would need to do that on the input function though, with help of angle brackets, like this. But what is the type of data we expect to get here? Well, it's in the end the shape of these annual results here, the annual data here. It will be an array full of objects where every object has this shape. So an object that has a year property, interest property, and so on. So what I'll do is I'll copy this code here, this object, and go back to my investment results and use that here, though of course, like this, it's not a type. I need to replace the part after the colon here with valid types. So year, for example, should be a number. The interest should be a number, the value at the end of the year should be a number, the annual investment should be a number, the total interest should be a number, and the total amount invested should be a number. So pretty straightforward. And that's also the type you would use here between those angle brackets, by the way. if you were using this input function instead of this approach here. Now you'll see that I'll still get an error here because I have no initial value assigned to results. So what we can do here to fix this problem is either add a question mark here after the property name to tell TypeScript that this is an optional property which might have this value, or a value of this type to be precise, but which might also be undefined. Or we add an exclamation mark to tell TypeScript that this will always be a value of this shape here. Now here a question mark seems more appropriate because, of course, if the user hasn't clicked calculate yet, we won't have any results yet, and therefore it makes sense that this investment results component might be displayed without any results being available. So that's how I'll set this up here. Now with the input added, we can go back to the app component, to the app component template, and use our app investment results component here. Of course, it's not available yet, so we need to import it and add it to this imports array on the app component. But with it, it is available, and with that, we can then also bind this results property. Though it's also fine if we would pass some undefined value as an initial value here, because thanks to this question mark, that is a value we anticipate here in the investment results component. But either way, at the moment, I got nothing to pass to the app investment results component from inside the app component, because in the app component TypeScript file, I'm calculating the annual data, but I'm then just logging it to the console, which is not that helpful. In order to make it available to the app component template so that we can then there use it as a value for some property binding, for example, I have to store that annual data in a property of the app component. So here I'll add a results data property. The name, of course, is up to you. And this property should actually have the same data shape as we have in the investment results component here for the input. And actually there I have a tiny error now that I look at it again. I'm expecting an object of this shape, but of course this should actually be an array of such objects. And the valid TypeScript type definition for that would be this, with those square brackets after the object type. This tells TypeScript that the type of results is actually an array full of objects that have this shape. That would be the valid type here. But that's now also the type I want to use in my app component for this results data property. And again, we could outsource this into a separate file, but here, to keep this a bit shorter, I'll not do that. You could definitely do it, though. But with that, I have this results data property, which has this shape. And initially, this is undefined. And to tell TypeScript that this is fine, I'll also add a question mark here, which means it may hold data of this shape, but it may also be undefined, as it initially will be, for example. And now, as a next step, we can replace this console log statement with an assignment to results data. And I want to store my calculated annual data in that results data property. And now with that done, finally, in the app component template, we can pass this results data property as a value to the results input property on app investment results. And that's a common pattern you might see from time to time in Angular applications, that you got one component that provides some data to the parent component, to the app component in this case, with help of a custom output, a custom event, and that the parent component, the app component here, then does something with that data and passes it down as an input to some other component. That is a fairly common pattern. With that done, this app investment results component should receive these results, and we can now use them there. And that's now what I'll do as a next step. So how can we now use the results here in the investment results component? Well, in two main ways. For one, I want to check whether we maybe don't have any results, so that in that case we show this paragraph. Otherwise, if we do have results, I want to output some rows in that table. Now let's start with the if check, and if you're using modern Angular, you can output this content conditionally by adding @if here, and by then putting your condition between those parentheses. And here my condition is that results is not truthy, so not results. If that's the case, this paragraph should be displayed. Now, this starting project, which I provided to you, uses an Angular version that's recent enough to support this modern @if syntax. In older Angular projects, you would need to use the ngIf directive, like this. But here it's not required. Now, this if syntax here also supports an @else branch, which will become active if this condition is not met. So if we do have results, and therefore here I'll grab my table like this and output that here in that else branch. With that, if you save that, you should see this fallback text, and to improve the styling of that, I'll actually add the class center to it so that it is centered. So that looks better. Now, of course, if we have results, I want to output them here. And by the way, if I would click calculate, this table would be rendered, so the if check works. But of course, we have no rows yet. So that's what we need to change. And therefore, we should dynamically output some rows here in that table body. And we can do this with @for. Another modern control flow statement supported by Angular. Now, @for needs your looping code, or the code that defines through which data it should loop and iterate between those parentheses. And therefore here we can write result of results, so that we loop through the results property, which will hold an array value, so we can loop through it. And we then extract every entry into such a result variable, which we can access between the curly braces to output that data. Now we also need to add something here after a semicolon, and that is track, and then define which criteria uniquely identifies every entry in that array. And in that case, that would be the year property, for example, because every element in this results array will have a unique year assigned to it, and that is required by Angular for performance reasons. With that, though, we can then render one table row per element, and then have multiple columns in there, where we, for example, output the result year in the first column using this string interpolation syntax with the double curly braces. And I'm outputting the year in the first column because that is my first column heading as well. Now the second column should then output the investment value, which we can get from result.value end of year. So that's what our investment is currently worth. And then thereafter, I output the interest gained in that year. Thereafter, we have the total interest, and thereafter the total amount invested. With that, if you save this, you should actually be able to enter something here, enter some values, and click calculate, and you should see a table. Now, the values will not look that great yet. They're not formatted as currency, but we'll fix this soon. You should see some rows here though, and that